And we are back for Overanalyzing House of the Dragon, getting into how it came to be that the Blacks faced off against the Greens. The world was against Rhaenys, and now it's against Rhaenyra, but Archmaester Gildain wants us to believe that the Dance of the Dragons was really because a teenage girl may or may not have had sex. The rumors are all over the place, which brings us to Rhaenyra's wedding. And so let's continue. In 114 AC, Rhaenyra Targaryen, Princess of Dragonstone, took to husband Sir Laenor Velaryon, knighted a fortnight before the wedding, since it was deemed necessary the prince consort be a knight. The bride was 17 years old, the groom 20, and all agreed that they made a handsome couple. The wedding was celebrated with 7 days of feasts and jousting, the greatest tourney in many a year. Amongst the competitors were Queen Alicent's siblings, 5 sworn brothers of the Kingsguard, Breakbones, and the groom's favourite, Sir Joffrey Lonmouth, known as the Knight of Kisses. When Rhaenyra bestowed her garter on Sir Harwin, her new husband laughed and gave one of his own to Sir Joffrey. And so, although the previous sentence had Rhaenyra heading to Driftmark, we now have jumped to the wedding of Rhaenyra and Laenor, which takes place in King's Landing, and which the rest of the paragraph is about. This does call into question why the first sentence was even added, and how it relates to everything. Was it important information that Rhaenyra sailed to Driftmark to have her betrothal brokered? How exactly? The paragraph flows much better without the first sentence altogether, but it seems quite important to Gildain to say that Rhaenyra sailed on a boat with Harwin, implying that there is a romance. But of course, the only reason we would even think that there would be a romance between them at this point in the story is Mushroom's ridiculous tale. And so you can see Gildain's scheme: prime the reader with a dubious tale, but then present a true tale right after to color its interpretation. Still, Harwin does appear later at the tourney, the sentence wasn't really necessary, so there may be something else going on that George R. Martin is pointing to that we will get to later. Anyway, with this paragraph, we can piece together the timeline here regarding Rhaenyra's wedding. It's not completely firm, but it seems that the debate on who Rhaenyra should marry happened when Rhaenyra was 16 and Laenor 19, but the actual decision wasn't presented to Rhaenyra until later, when she was 17 and Laenor 20. Rhaenyra and her father argue and she accepts, then Criston professes his love and was rejected that same night, and not long after, Rhaenyra sails to Driftmark to have her marriage brokered. Then about 2 weeks pass, and we have the wedding, as we are told that Laenor was knighted a fortnight before the wedding. Now, that quick timeline near the end is relevant, as we have at least 3 men who Rhaenyra is rumored to be intimate with within a 2 or 3 week period. Anyway, with regards to Laenor's knighting, Gildain seems to imply that Laenor is up-jumped and not worthy of his title. It's a small little insult, and odd since the guy is a dragon rider. But the knighting of Laenor is an interesting event, and this does relate to that first sentence again. You see, in Ice and Fire, the man who knights another knight is significant. It's a status symbol to have a knight vouch for the quality of another knight. Jaime, for example, boasts that he was knighted by Arthur Dayne at the age of 15, meaning Arthur Dayne thought him worthy. Quentyn Martell could have been knighted by Oberyn but turns him down to be knighted by Anders Ironwood. Dunk runs into considerable trouble in the Hedge Knight when no one knows the man who supposedly knighted him. Who knights a person matters. And in this brokering, Rhaenyra or Rhaenyra's faction felt it very important that Laenor have the status of a knight. Status matters, and it stands to reason that she would certainly care about the status of the knight who knights Laenor. The man knighting her king consort is not going to be a random knight like Joffrey Lonmouth, for example. Which brings us back to Sir Harwin Strong, a man who came to Rhaenyra's brokering. A brokering where it was decided that Laenor needed to be knighted. Sir Harwin Strong is the strongest man in the Seven Kingdoms and the heir to Harrenhal. He is, by all accounts, famous, high-born, a rather important man, and, as the strongest man in the Seven Kingdoms title suggests, a great fighter. He is the perfect candidate to knight Laenor, which would better explain why he was brought to Driftmark. Yes, he may just be accompanying the princess and his sisters, and Gildain is certainly trying to imply that Harwin is Rhaenyra's new sworn shield by using the term champion, and implying that he's her lover by including information after the mushroom story. But it's also quite possible that he was there to knight Laenor, giving him the status and making a connection between House Strong and House Velaryon. Now, yes, Corlys Velaryon was a knight, and certainly could have knighted Rhaenor if he were not in the Stepstones fighting. But oddly, we only have a single example of a father knighting a son in all of Ice and Fire, and that is Aegon the Conqueror knighting Maegor the Cruel. This may be because a father would be seen as biased towards a son, thus them vouching for their quality would mean little, just as a letter of recommendation from one's parents would mean little to a university or an employer. And so, although we have limited information, it's quite possible that Harwin was brought to Driftmark as a man to knight Rhaenor, but Gildain is trying to insinuate something else, that he is Rhaenyra's sworn shield and lover. Anyway, the wedding ends up being a large affair with 7 days of feasting and jousting, and this is where the timeline becomes very important again. This is a wedding, and if you've ever been to a wedding, you know that the ceremony happens relatively close to the beginning of the events. The celebration happens after there is something to celebrate. In fact, we have another wedding tourney to look to in Ice and Fire, and that is the wedding between Lord Butterwell and Lady Frey in the Mystery Night. The two are married, and then there is a tourney. And so with regards to this 7-day affair, Rhaenyra is likely to be wedded and bedded on the first day. And this is extremely important to remember as Gildain is very misleading with his presentation of information. So he first introduces the competitors for the tourney, and then brings up bestowing garters on Harwin and Joffrey. Now, a bit on garters. So today we think of garters as being mini suspenders on stockings, or an elastic band high on the thigh of a bride. They are highly sexualized objects in a modern context. In medieval times, they were just ribbons or belts tied around one's calves to keep your socks up. That said, a calf was a pretty sexualized area of a woman back then. Now, the reason garters are sexualized, and Gildain is definitely sexualizing garters in this passage, is that there really were bedding ceremonies in medieval times where articles of clothing were ripped off or grabbed off or thrown off the bride and groom. And getting an article of clothing was considered lucky. Specifically, the garter. And this is why we have the garter toss tradition at weddings today, where good luck, in finding love now, is bestowed on someone who gets a garter. It's a relic of the bedding ceremony. And so, let's go back to the text. Rhaenyra bestows her garter on Harwin, and Rhaenor, laughing, gives one to Joffrey. Now, because the previous sentence is about competitors in the tourney, and the next sentence is about Criston being denied a favor, the reader assumes that these objects are favors for a tourney, and because they are garters, they are sexualized, and we get the impression that Rhaenyra is having sex with Harwin and Rhaenor Joffrey. But that's not what the text actually says. It simply says that Rhaenyra gave a garter to Harwin and Rhaenor one to Joffrey. That's it. And let's be realistic. If the heir to the Seven Kingdoms was really having sex with Harwin Strong, would she pull up her dress, take off her garter, and bestow it on her secret lover in front of every important highborn person in the kingdom? And would she really be that reckless just a couple of weeks after she told Criston Cole that her queenship was really important, according to Septon Eustace? And would Rhaenor really laugh at that situation and take off his own garter and give it to Joffrey Lonmouth, a man he's purportedly having sex with, in a world that hates gay people? Or did Harwin and Joffrey simply get garters during the bedding ceremony, which is all about getting garters, and happened on the first day? If one stops for a moment and really thinks about it, it's obviously the latter case. In fact, if it were the former, the couple would be spoiling the bedding ceremony by giving away their garters early. But Gildain's words completely transform what's happening. On first read, the reader is primed by the mushroom story, primed by words like champion and talk of tourneys, primed by pages and pages of implication that Rhaenyra fancies who she gives a favor to at tourneys, and in the end, with a garter to Harwin, Gildain is able to take a situation where Rhaenyra is actually having sex with Rhaenor, yet it's turned into an accusation that she's having sex with Harwin. Denied Rhaenyra's favor, Criston Cole turned to Queen Alicent instead. Wearing her token, the young Lord Commander of the Kingsguard defeated all challengers, fighting in a black fury. He left Breakbones with a broken collarbone and a shattered elbow, prompting Mushroom to name him Broken Bones thereafter. But it was the Knight of Kisses who felt the fullest measure of his wrath. Cole's favorite weapon was the Morning Star, and the blows he rained down on Sir Laenor's champion cracked his helm and left him senseless in the mud. Born bloody from the field, Sir Joffrey died without recovering consciousness 6 days later. Mushroom tells us that Sir Laenor spent every hour of those days at his bedside, and wept bitterly when the stranger claimed him. So next we get to the tourney, meaning the wedding and bedding are done. Rhaenyra is married to Laenor, and Criston Cole then turns to Alicent for a favor. Now, it's a bit difficult to determine exactly what is going on in this tourney. Is Harwin Rhaenyra's champion? Was he actually presented a favor at the tourney for the purposes of luck? Or did he simply catch a garter, another lucky item, and then perhaps wear it, making people assume he was her champion? In the previous paragraph, Harwin was called a champion, but that was 2 weeks prior and not at this tourney, and he certainly consistently called Rhaenyra's champion after this. All in all, it does seem likely that Harwin was Rhaenyra's champion at the wedding tourney, though we should of course remember that giving a favor to someone doesn't mean you're having sex with them. After all, Criston Cole wears Alicent's favor from this point on and is her champion and her sworn shield, but there's no implication of them having a romance. Or at least in Fire and Blood there isn't. In the original Rogue Prince, there is a line that says that Alicent was pleased to grant Sir Criston her favor, but that line was removed. What is certain is Criston was not Rhaenyra's champion, which again points to some falling out happening just before the wedding. Sir Criston was Rhaenyra's champion in every tourney before this, so it's odd to suddenly not be chosen. Now, Criston then fights in the tourney in a Black Fury, supposedly, beating all champions. And this is a bit weird. Gildane makes it sound as if Criston is fighting in a melee and not jousting when he defeats all of the challengers. He is said to fight in a Black Fury, not ride in a Black Fury, and he kills Joffrey Lonmouth with a reckless Morning Star flail, not a lance. And what is so weird about this is that in the Mystery Night we are specifically told that a melee at a wedding would be unheard of and unseemly. In fact, we are told this twice in that story. No melees at weddings. Now, one could argue that the reason that they're unseemly is because of the death of Joffrey Lonmouth, but The Rogue Prince was written 4 years after the Mystery Night, and George R. R. Martin probably had not worked out the details of these events. And honestly, people die in tourneys all the time. They aren't going to stop their fun because of one guy. So unless George R. R. Martin forgot what he wrote twice in the Mystery Night, we have to assume that actually it was jousting. And when we look at Sir Harwin Strong's injuries, they do sound like a fall from a horse, where one lands on an elbow and breaks the collarbone with it. If in a melee, one would think he would be injured in either the elbow or the collarbone, but not both. And Gildane mentions no Morning Star when speaking of Harwin's injuries. And so it seems that with Harwin, Sir Criston Cole simply unhorsed him, fair and square, and Harwin got hurt. There was no rage involved as far as we can tell. Gildane is making it sound like Criston was jealous of Harwin and took him out, but there's no evidence of that. And then there's Joffrey Lonmouth. Now, there are some jousting tilts where one can choose to continue battle after being unhorsed, so this situation with Joffrey may be that. And the flail is an imprecise weapon. Accidents happen. Joffrey as well is of an age with Laenor, which means he's young, inexperienced, possibly up-jumped. So it's of course fully possible that Criston had no intention of killing Joffrey, though using the weapon in the first place rather than a blunted sword was a horrible decision on Criston's part. The situation with Criston and Joffrey is clearly supposed to parallel the Hands tourney with the Mountain and Sir Hugh. In both situations, we have an inexperienced boy up against a very experienced man who has little concern for human life, and an accident happened. And then people suspected murder, when there wasn't necessarily, though the implication of murder was utilized. That said, it's a bit of a coincidence that of all of the competitors, he kills Joffrey Lonmouth, Laenor's champion. If there were anger inside Criston, it was directed at Laenor, the man who married Rhaenyra, which again points to Septon Eustace's tale being true, where Sir Criston wanted to marry Rhaenyra. As it happens, Mushroom's tale would have given Criston no reason to be angry, as in that tale, he's the one who rejects Rhaenyra. This makes the narrative that Gildane is pushing contradict itself, A Harwin affair relies on Sir Criston's rejection of Rhaenyra to happen, but Criston's fury against Harwin is used as evidence of the affair. But Criston wouldn't be angry if he was the one doing the rejecting. That was Eustace's story, not mushrooms. It all makes no sense. Gyldain is picking and choosing various aspects of the Mushroom and Eustace stories, but without caring about cause and effect. So we also hear that Laenor spends 7 days with Joffrey until he dies, which makes us recall the months that Catelyn spent at Bran's bedside, Ned at the bedside of a dying Robert, and the 7-day vigil that Jaime attempts for his father in A Feast for Crows. Interestingly, Mushroom claims to be there with Joffrey and Laenor in order to observe them for 7 days. Now, clearly Mushroom and Gyldain are including this mourning in an attempt to show that Laenor had a romance with Joffrey. But we should also remember that Joffrey and Laenor were friends, just as Ned and Robert were friends, just as Jon and Sam are friends. Would anyone think mourning between these men as evidence of romance? In fact, there's not much in the text to tell us that Joffrey was gay. There's some rumors about Laenor, there's him getting a garter in a bedding ceremony, and him having the nickname Knight of Kisses, which clearly comes from his family's sigil. And even if either Laenor or Joffrey were gay, that doesn't necessarily mean both of them were gay. After all, Rhaegar and Jon Con were friends. So the mourning period of 7 days also seems to be used to make it seem like Laenor missed the bedding of Rhaenyra. It's a 7-day tourney, it's a 7-day mourning, he's super depressed and leaves right after. When does he have a chance, right? 7 and 7. Except there was already a bedding with the whole garters thing. And the match between Joffrey and Criston probably didn't happen on the first day. Sir Criston is said to face many opponents and defeat them all. Whatever the case, Laenor weeps bitter tears, meaning he's angry, and the person to be angry at would be Criston Cole, which leads us to the next paragraph. King Viserys was most wroth as well. A joyous celebration had become the occasion of grief and recrimination. It was said that Queen Alicent did not share his displeasure, however. Soon after, she asked that Sir Criston Cole be made her personal protector. The coolness between the king's wife and the king's daughter was plain for all to see. Even envoys from the free cities made note of it in letters sent back to Pentos, Braavos, and Old Volantis. And so here we hear that in the fallout of Joffrey Lonmouth's death, there was recrimination. A recrimination is an accusation. Clearly Laenor, last seen bitter, is accusing Criston Cole of murdering Joffrey, or at minimum, of being reckless. And in the aftermath, Sir Criston is made Alicent's personal protector. And so let's put together a timeline of what Gyldain is implying versus what most likely really happened. Now, Gyldain certainly implies that about 3 weeks prior to Joffrey dying, that is, before the 1-week coma period and the 2-week betrothal period, Rhaenyra gets rid of Criston as her personal protector, so Criston would be guarding no one during the tourney, and then he murders Joffrey Lonmouth because he's angry, and it impresses Alicent so much that Criston gets promoted to being her personal protector. This means that in that scenario, King Viserys would just allow the Lord Commander to be removed from protecting his heir for no given reason. Then, after the Prince Consort complains about Criston murdering someone, Viserys then promotes him to protecting his wife. It's just not likely. No, what makes sense is that Criston was not removed as Rhaenyra's sworn shield until after the tourney. It's only until after Joffrey dies that Laenor is angry, so King Viserys moves Sir Criston from protecting his heir to protecting his queen, as clearly Laenor would not want the man who murdered his friend protecting his wife. Of course, this means that Harwin Strong was in fact not Rhaenyra's sworn shield before the wedding. This is an important point that will come up later. And even after, it's going to be really tough for Harwin to be the sworn shield for Rhaenyra when he has a broken elbow and collarbone. Collarbones take months to heal, and a shattered elbow, those sometimes never heal correctly. It may be that there's a reason why Mushroom insists on referring to Harwin as broken bones. It could be that his injuries are an enduring characteristic of him, something that ails him for years. And so the question is, who is Rhaenyra's sworn shield after Sir Criston leaves, as Sir Harwin is injured? And the answer is, some other dude. We have no idea. It wasn't Criston, and it wasn't Harwin. On a side note, we hear that envoys from Braavos, Pentos, and Volantis are at the wedding, but notably not envoys from Tyrosh, Myr, Lys, or Dorne, showing that Westeros is certainly still involved in the war in the Stepstones. And despite their feud, Viserys and Daemon are still allies in that war. And it's interesting that the envoys from Braavos, Pentos, and Volantis take note of the coolness between Rhaenyra and Alicent. It seems they all fear a succession crisis is looming, and that it will affect the Stepstones. Sir Laenor returned to Driftmark thereafter, leaving many to wonder if his marriage had ever been consummated. The princess remained at court, surrounded by her friends and admirers. Sir Criston was not amongst them, having gone over entirely to the Queen's party, the Greens. But the massive and redoubtable Breakbones, or Broken Bones as Mushroom had it, filled his place, becoming the foremost of the Blacks, ever at Rhaenyra's side at feast and ball and hunt. Her husband raised no objections. Sir Laenor preferred the comforts of high tide, where he soon found a new favorite in a household knight named Sir Carl Corey. And so now Gildain, after pushing stories about Rhaenyra having a romance with Harwin Strong with one hand, suggests that Laenor did not consummate his marriage with the other, which is of course ridiculous. As we've already talked about, the wedding and bedding would have happened at the beginning of the tourney, before the injury and death of Joffrey Lonmouth. We even hear of people getting garters. Obviously, Gildain's goal is trying to get us to believe that Laenor Velaryon is not the true father of Rhaenyra's children, and that Harwin Strong is the true father of Rhaenyra's children, namely, the eldest Jacaerys. And I'm going to be a broken record on this point. It's just extremely unlikely that Harwin Strong is the father of Jace. There simply isn't time. Criston Cole, Laenor Velaryon, or whoever Rhaenyra's sworn shield is, are all possibilities, but almost certainly not Harwin. Keep in mind that Jace is born late in the year 114, which means he was conceived in the same year sometime, likely near Laenor and Rhaenyra's wedding, which also happened in 114. Obviously, for Harwin to be the father, he needs to have private time with Rhaenyra so that they can have sex, which is difficult as Rhaenyra has a sworn shield protecting her day and night. So, what are the pro-Harwin possibilities? Well, Mushroom attempts to explain everything by saying that Rhaenyra snuck out and happened to run into Harwin, and they had sex somewhere, and then for some reason they were discovered by Mushroom. It's a pretty ridiculous tale. Or one can assume that Harwin was in fact Rhaenyra's sworn shield at some point, but even if Harwin did have that position, he is massively injured at the tourney. He is Broken Bones with a broken collarbone and elbow. He is likely incapable of sex for a while. But even if he were able to tolerate the pain and get through it, it wouldn't matter as he wouldn't be acting as Rhaenyra's sworn shield until he heals, which would take many months. The injury wouldn't just remove his ability, but his opportunity. And so this leaves only the small 2 to 3 week window after the time Rhaenyra and Criston had their falling out, but before his injury. But again, this assumes that Harwin was Rhaenyra's sworn shield for this period, which rests on Viserys replacing Criston with Harwin for no reason, and later promoting Criston in the face of Laenor's accusation. But even if we assume that the unlikely event of Harwin being Rhaenyra's sworn shield happened, Rhaenyra would barely know Harwin. Would she really be jumping right into bed with the man after only a couple weeks, just before her wedding? Keep in mind that Gildain also seems to imply that Rhaenyra and Harwin got to know each other and had their romance bloom after the wedding. He speaks of them always being together during feasts and balls and hunts, which is odd. Would there really be so many feasts and balls so soon after a huge 7-day wedding tourney? And hunts? Harwin has broken his collarbone and elbow. He isn't riding a horse for a long time. And Rhaenyra is pregnant soon after the wedding. She certainly isn't riding. If Rhaenyra and Harwin are going to balls and feasts, it's probably well after the wedding, and they certainly aren't going on any hunts in the year 114. Gildain seems to be describing later events and is inserting them here to give the impression that there's romance between Harwin and Rhaenyra, and thus he's the father of Jace. But the timeline makes this very unlikely, near impossible. It's just unlikely that Harwin is Jace's father. And this is a good place to stop. We will talk more of Jace's paternity next time, and get into the death of Rhea Royce. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.